All right, I think we're starting. Welcome back. This is now week 7. Hopefully you got chapter 7 done over the break. And so now we're in chapter 8, part 8. And let me tell you now that I only divided this chapter into 2 sections, and therefore each one is quite long. If it seems like it's too long, stop in the middle of it somewhere and take a break and then come back. That will help you stay focused. All right, this chapter is all about employment, unemployment, and the labor market. And I also want to tell you that in the second part of this, the second installment on this chapter, there's going to be some material that is not in the book, but I will be holding you to it. So just be aware of that. And you have to be sure and watch part B. Okay, so 2 very different kinds of employment. I saw the caption, but I don't remember now what country this photo was taken in. Clearly, this is a very different kind of labor than this guy that's working. Apparently, it looks like in a steel mill, but I don't know for sure. I know that you need to burn a lot of coal to heat up the steel, and I think that's what that's about. All right, moving right along. So, these slides with the blue background are from the book, and they divide the text into different segments. All right, now I'm going to start with some important definitions. You really need to be familiar with these. These come from the government's Bureau of Labor Statistics. They created the definitions, and they keep track of the whole labor market. And that's where there's a ton of statistics about the labor market. Okay, the labor force is a term that you see used sometimes in the news. That consists of both the employed people and the unemployed people. Now, that's one of the misconceptions of thinking that unemployed people aren't in the labor force. As it turns out, yes, they are. But it's a very specific, fairly narrow definition of what we mean by unemployed, as you'll see in a moment. Okay. There's also a fair amount of unlearning you're going to need to do, and I think I just gave you an example of one, because people think that the labor force only consists of employed people, and that's not true. Okay, so to be unemployed, you must be actively looking for a job. The opposite word, the operative word here is actively. If you are jobless, don't have a job, but you're not actively looking, you are not unemployed. Rather, you are in the category called, quote, not in the labor force. Okay? So ask yourself, are you working? Do you have a job or not? Or are you working for a family business or not? Either one counts. If the answer is no, then there's another question of, are you looking for a job? Actively seeking, going out and putting in applications and so on. If the answer is yes, you're unemployed. If the answer is no, you're not unemployed. You're simply not in the labor force. So that's the way it's defined, and you need to be keeping that in mind. Okay. Now, one last point here that is another point of misconception. Being officially unemployed does not always make you qualified to collect unemployment benefits. All right? Those rules are administered by a different department, not the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they are much more strict. So, and those also are, a lot of that work is farmed out to the individual states. So, there's a lot of unemployed people who can't collect benefits for a variety of reasons. Now, here's some more definitions. The unemployment rate. Anytime you see a word rate, think a fraction. And indeed, this is one. The unemployment rate, and I call it capital letter U, even though the book doesn't use that term. I do. So U is the number of unemployed people divided by the number of people in the labor force. Okay, not the whole population, simply the number in the labor force. Okay, in other words, well, here's 2 other ways of saying the same thing. Unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the number employed plus unemployed, because that is the labor force. Or job seekers divided by job holders plus job seekers. And all three are ways of saying the same thing. All right, I'm going to leave this up here for just a minute, let you look this over again. I know it's hard to read and listen at the same time. So take a look at these. You can use any one you want. I tend to use the last one because it's sort of quicker and easier and more succinct. All right, and I want to talk a little bit now about what's bad about unemployment. Some things are sort of obvious that you know, and some you might not. First of all, humanitarian reason. It does social and psychological harm to unemployed people and their families in a lot of different ways, such as loss of income, a loss of a sense of self-worth, an increase in domestic violence, crime, alcoholism, and drug abuse. We see all of those going up when unemployment goes up, which is usually during a recession, Okay. And here's the one that's not so obvious. This is a waste of human resources. You remember that production possibilities curve that we did, I guess it's this way, earlier in the semester, where we looked at, given the resources we have, if you're right on that line, that says that you're using all the resources fully. Outside the line is not possible, you don't have enough resources. But inside the line, we sometimes call the wasteland, because that's an area where the economy is not fully functioning up to its potential, and as a result, there's a lot of unemployment. That's a lot of human resources going to waste, because to be considered unemployed in the first place, you have to be ready to work, qualified to work, available for work, and so on. And so if these are people that want a job, they're qualified for a job, they're able to do a job, but there's no job for them, they can't find work, well, then that's work that isn't getting done. That's production that isn't happening. Okay? So, what I said here, when qualified people can't find work, production, which is GDP, is going to fall. Okay? All right, now, this table is from 2013. So the unemployment rates now are considerably lower than now. For all workers right now, it's only 3.7%. So it's about half of what it was in 2013. But we were still coming out of the recession in 2013. Now we're not. Now we're well out of that. Well, I kept it up here because the relative size of these hasn't changed much. So in other words, for non-white people, unemployment rates are higher by a lot. For teenagers, they're way higher. For people with a bachelor's degree, their unemployment rate tends to be substantially lower than for people with just a high school degree, and here even less than a high school degree is much higher. And then for gender, they're very much the same. They're very, very close. Okay. So that's why I wanted you to see that, even though these particular numbers, I should do it like this, these particular numbers now are considerably lower. Okay, now this looks at the unemployment rate in the United States at various times, and you can see, spiking and falling, and so on. And each one of these was all that are gray were in fact recessions. So as you look at this, you can see in 69 and 70, and then this one is 73 to 75. This one's 1980. This is 81, 82. This is 1990. This is 2001. This is 2007. We've got them stretch out more at the right-hand end of the scale, just so you can see it better. Notice it went way, way, way up in 2007 and 2009. It did in the year 1981 too, but only very, very briefly. This lasted a way longer time. Okay, whoops, I don't want to do that. All right, now I want to talk about the labor force participation rate. And I'll give you a definition. The first definition is for overall. It's the number of people in the labor force, meaning employed plus unemployed, divided by the number of people in the total population. So there's a lot of people who are not in the labor force with good reason. Now we can also do it for subgroups. So we can talk about the teen labor force participation. And we're really asking what fraction of all teenagers in the country are in the labor force. For male labor force participation, now we're looking at all males in the country, and we're saying the number of males that are in the labor force divided by the total male population, which will then give you the fraction of all males that are in the labor force. We do the same thing for females, same thing, whoops, I didn't mean to do that, and the same thing for people over the age of 65. So, again, I'm going to be quiet for a minute, just let you look at these, because I'll expect you to be able to know these and understand what we're talking about here. Okay, let me move on now. This is a graph showing the male and female labor force participation rate, ages 24 to 54, in 1948 to 2012. Okay, what do you notice? Should jump out at you. Okay. Now, about that slide. Whoa, what's going on here? Are women stealing jobs from men? Let's back up, take a look. Are women stealing jobs from men? Actually, no. Traditionally, male jobs, think steel workers, for example, are work particularly unskilled labor that requires heavy musculature, ability to lift large quantities of things, and so on. And I said, think steel workers. Think about that picture you saw earlier of the guy shoveling hot coals. Those jobs are declining in number as the manufacturing sector loses its importance. And I might add also because there's a tremendous amount of automation that's gone on in the manufacturing sector in recent years. And Chapter 7 talks about that. The service sector, on the other hand, is growing, where many women are employed. And again, this shows up in Chapter 7. So consequently, that's what's been happening, is the jobs that are sort of the traditional male jobs have been disappearing from this country. And let me add one more piece to this. People tend to live in families. And what was going on in the last 10, 15, 20 years has been, as the traditional jobs for men have declined, husbands have been laid off. A lot of them, if they're older, if they're in their 40s and 50s, they're taking early retirement and just simply not ever looking for another job. As that happens, the family sometimes need mom to go to work when she hadn't been. She'd perhaps been a stay-at-home mom, or she'd been a traditional housewife staying at home. And now with dad having been laid off and now retired but with not so much income, she goes to work for the first time. And so that helps to explain some of the two numbers, or those two lines, looking like they're kind of converging. And that the business of women being in the labor force in particularly has gone up dramatically in recent years. Okay, I don't want to do that. Okay, so now, more recent trends. Here's some more. Overall, the labor force participation rate has been falling. We're not really sure exactly why, and we don't exactly know whether this trend will continue. But that's been the case. Some of that was during this recession. People got so discouraged looking for a job that they gave up trying, and then they were not in the labor force. And some of them got very comfortable like that and never came back. But among people over 65, especially women, the labor force participation rate is actually rising. Now, if you remember that graph from a moment ago, that was stopped at age 55. But among older people, there's actually, in the last few years, we've seen a rising rate of labor force participation. Now, some reasons. First of all, people not only live longer, they stay healthy longer. They figure, I'm healthy, I'm fine, why not continue to earn a nice salary? But the other reason, not the only other reason, but another reason, is they can't afford to retire. Because two things. First of all, there's been a decline in retirement savings because wages have been pretty stagnant since the 1980s, actually. The real wage for low wage people was at its height in 1968. And so right now people simply aren't doing as well during their lives, and they can't afford to save. And so all of a sudden they're old now and they don't have the savings. So they keep working. And then there's a decline in decent pensions, and I need to explain that a little bit. First of all, people used to, particularly middle-class people, used to get defined benefits. Now they don't. Now they get 401ks and they get defined contributions. Now let me explain the difference. The defined benefit one, the better one, says, okay, when you retire, this is going to be how much you're going to get per month. We have defined the benefit in your pension. Okay? It's guaranteed. And the federal government backs it up as well. The companies, if they say they're going to give you a pension for the rest of your life, they have to do it. I mean, there's been a few exceptions, but basically that's the way it works. All right. But those are becoming just really rare. Companies don't like them because of that requirement that they commit to giving you that benefit the rest of your life. You, on the other hand, kind of like that because now you know what you can count on. Now you know that for the rest of your life, you're going to get X number of dollars. May not be a lot of dollars, but you can count on it, just like you can count on Social Security. And by the way, you can. Excuse me. On the other hand, what people are getting now, and again, this is hitting the middle class particularly very hard, is defined contributions. So they'll tell you you're going to get a retirement money, but the way it works is we're guaranteeing that we're going to put money into a retirement fund, but we're not guaranteeing any specific amount to you personally. Here's why. This particularly became a huge issue during the last Great Recession, because what was happening is that defined contribution they were making was to a 401k. And basically that's saying, on your behalf, we're going to invest money for you in the stock market. That's all. We're contributing X number of dollars into a fund that's going to be invested in the stock market. Not going to go to you. We're just saying this is how much we're going to put into that fund. Okay? Now, what if the values of the stock go down? Too bad for you. Okay? If the value of the stock goes up, lucky for you. But that means you are the one assuming the risk. They're not. And companies just like you want to be able to know what to expect. And they don't want to be in a situation where if the stock market goes down, they're still obligated to give you a certain amount of pension money. So instead, they say, well, it can fluctuate. Stock market's doing well, great. You have more retirement money. But when it falls, ooh. Now, I know a lot of people who are retired and had a defined contribution pension, and during that Great Recession, they took it on the chin. The amount they were able to get in their retirement went way down because the stock market went way down. Well, a lot of older people don't really want to have that kind of risk. It's fine when you're young, and if the stock market goes down, oh well, you'll recoup. But you can't count on that if you're already pretty old. So that's another reason why people have stayed in the labor force, is because sometimes the value of the retirement fund goes down and they can't control it. Okay. Now, this is a summary, and this is in the book. Are you under age 16? Are you in an institution? Or are you on active military duty? If yes to any of those questions, you're not even surveyed. They don't even want to talk to you. The way they actually find out whether people are employed or unemployed or not in the labor force is they literally call them up and ask them. It's a little bit more problematical now because of cell phones. Nevertheless, that is still how they do it. They just poll people and ask them. And people have no particular incentive to lie because this is not tied to benefits at all. And it's all strictly anonymous, confidential. Okay, now if you said no to all three of those, then another set of questions comes up. Did you work at all last week for pay or profit? Did you work 15 hours or more in a family business? For this one, did you work at all, even at 2 hours? And this one, 15 hours if you're working in a family business. If yes to either question, then you're employed. Okay. Now the numbers in blue again are from 2013, and so the numbers will be different now. More people are employed. I don't know whether that number's changed much. Now, if no to both of those questions, you weren't working in any way, shape, or form last week, then next set of questions: have you been actively searching for work, and are you available to start a job? If yes to both questions, then then and only then you are considered unemployed. So you have to not be any of those. You have to not be any of those in order to be down in this category. And now, if you've been actively searching for work and also are available to go to work, then yes, you are counted as unemployed. This 12.0 million, I'm sure, is different now. Now, the two groups together, if you recall, are the labor force. Okay, we're counting both of those together as the labor force. Okay, now moving down. But if you said no to either one of these two, then you are not in the labor force. Okay, so you're either employed, unemployed, or not in the labor force. Notice there's way more of these folks than there are of these folks. Okay. So I think it might be helpful. If you have any trouble keeping track of this, and hopefully you don't, if you do, print this slide out and, take it, stick it in your notebook and use it to review, because this summarizes everything we've been talking about already. Now, let's specifically talk about unemployment, and I want to say right now, as an extra credit opportunity, find the data to update the slides in number 7, which is the unemployment rates, and number 14, the numbers of people in the 3 categories that are in blue. Let me go back to that. Oh, never mind. I don't need to do that. Okay, here we are. Here's the blue numbers. That's what needs to be updated. Okay, so there's your extra credit opportunity. Now, let's look at this. Unemployment is calculated, looked at every week. However, there's a second number that's important, and that's how long did you stay unemployed. If you got laid off and you start looking for another job, and a week later you found one, or 2 weeks later you found one, then that's a short duration. But during the Great Recession, there were hundreds of thousands of people who got laid off, and they could not find another job that was in any way, shape, or form suitable for them. Okay? That they were qualified for and, could do. So that means that they could stay out for a long time, and did. But now that recession is over, and now people are finding work again, sometimes very quickly. But this graph is looking at, okay, the blue is looking at the unemployment rate for various years. This is looking at the average duration, and notice how it tracks. So when there's a lot of unemployment, people tend to stay unemployed for a longer period of time, which figures. There simply aren't as many jobs available during a recession. So it's kind of like a game of musical chairs. Okay. Now, there's 3 types of unemployment. You need to know these as well. All right, and I'm going to talk about each one, even though you'll see I'm just going to put the name of it up. But you need to know what they are. You need to not get them confused with each other. And you need to realize that they have different implications for the economy. First one, frictional is a non-problem. All right, and it goes like this: if somebody graduates from high school or college and they don't have a job, they have to look for a job. That takes time. So the frictional part is really a time problem. It simply takes time because as long as there's plenty of jobs out there, as there are now, it still takes some time for you to find the employer, but also for the employer to find you. So you got people in search for each other, but they haven't found each other. It may take a day, it may take a month. I don't know, it may take longer. Generally speaking, the better the economy's doing, the less the unemployment, the shorter that period of time is, but there is one. And as a result, unemployment is almost would never be zero. Okay, because of that time factor. So we call full employment a level that means that the only thing that we have is frictional employment. The other two, which are problems, we don't have. Okay, that's pretty much where we are now. The unemployment rate is very low at 3.7%. It's the lowest it's been for, I don't know, many, many years. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the point is, you still have some frictional. All right. And actually 3.7, that's not all frictional, but a couple of percentage points is. So the rest of it is one of the other two, which I'll talk about in a moment. So if you look at the 3.7%, how many percentage points are accounted for by strictly frictional, which we think is fine, and it's 1 to maybe 3%. It's gone down in recent years because people can find jobs faster now because of some of the online job match services. So there's a little bit less frictional now than there used to be. Okay, so that's frictional. Okay, there's literally friction so that the job market isn't moving totally smoothly. And as you'll see later when I show you some graphs, there the graphs are assuming full employment is zero, but in the real world it isn't because of frictional unemployment. Okay, cyclical. Notice the word cycle, he's kind of partly in here. This is related to the business cycle. Or I think bicycle or any kind of cycle. It is a problem, but it tends to be short-term. Now, what are we talking about here? We know that the general level of business goes up and down over the years. Right now, it's up considerably for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about. But the point is that unemployment goes up during a recession. That's basically what's happening because the economy isn't doing very well. People get laid off. So during the down part of the business cycle, you'll see a rise in unemployment. And during the up part of the business cycle, like we're in at the moment, we see unemployment fall. But most times, most recessions are relatively short-lived. Now, the last one we went through, what we called the Great Recession, that actually wasn't true. That lasted a pretty darn long time. And particularly the rise in unemployment lasted a pretty darn long time. But it did gradually come down. So, it's not like it's going to last for 20, 30 years. It doesn't. Okay, and hopefully people stay unemployed for relatively short periods of time. So it's a problem, and it can be a big problem. The unemployment rate right now, as I said, is 3.7%. But back in 1981, it was actually higher than this recent time. It got up to something like, I think, 14%. That's pretty bad. That's huge. Okay, now, the third one is structural. There's something wrong with the structure of our economy that creates a lot of unemployment that's hard to fix. It isn't going to go away on its own like the cyclical one does. This is a built-in structural issue. Now, I have some things I want to say about that I didn't make a slide for. I just want to tell you about. First of all, it can be because of skills mismatch. So you may have a lot of unemployed people, and there may be at the same time a lot of companies that are looking for workers, but they're looking for a particular kind of worker with a particular skill set, and it doesn't match what most people have. And as a result, you got the problem of, in a few industries, there's a shortage of workers, while at the same time there may be a recession on, and there's hundreds of thousands of people who can't find jobs. They're just not qualified for the jobs that do exist. Now, I want to give you a real-world example of this. There was a severe recession in the early 1980s when Ronald Reagan was the president, all right? And he did not believe that people could seriously be unemployed. He thought that just if people didn't have jobs, it meant they didn't want them, that they just weren't willing to take a job. And to prove that, he held up on TV Los Angeles Times, the help wanted section of the Los Angeles Times, at the time when unemployment rate was extremely high. And he said, look at this newspaper. My goodness, look at all those help wanted jobs. And he showed page after page of help wanted jobs that were listed in the LA Times. All right? So he said, see, I'm showing you, this is proof that indeed people just don't want to work. That's the problem. Okay, afterwards, some people did some checking on that. Well, what he was holding up was all the help wanted ads in the Los Angeles Times. But if you looked at what they were actually looking for, guess what? Aerospace engineers. That was what was in short supply. There was ad after ad after ad, listing after listing after listing. Help wanted aerospace engineer, must have a master's or a PhD in aerospace engineering. Well, obviously this is structural. This is a mismatch. I don't know how many of you, but I certainly don't have a degree in aerospace engineering. Most people don't. Furthermore, there's a geographic element to this as well, both locally and nationally. This was a national geographic element because the aerospace engineering fields were just really kind of opening up at that time in LA. But there were a fair number of, in fact, highly qualified aerospace engineers in the country, but they were in Texas or Boston or New York. They simply weren't in California. And they didn't necessarily want to quit the job they had and move to California. So that was a geographical mismatch as well as a skills mismatch. There's another kind of geographical mismatch as well, which is local. And that is where you have a situation where you don't have good public transportation and where there's a lot of low-income people who want jobs, looking for jobs, need jobs, but they live in the city. But a lot of manufacturing companies especially have moved out of the city. They've moved out to the suburbs, and there isn't any public transportation to get there. So consequently, if people don't have a job, they probably don't have a car either because they can't afford the car payments. So consequently, you got people who rely on public transportation, but they can't get to the jobs that are there. Now, that's something that sometimes local government steps in and they figure out a way to get some kind of local public transportation going, but not always. And so that can be an issue as well. So structural tends to be long-term. It tends to be sort of built into the whole structure of the economy, and it'll take some serious steps on the part of various people in the economy to make that be fixed. So it's not cyclical. It isn't about a recession, although the thing that Reagan held up was during a recession. But this whole thing, this structural thing, this is really about something that can last a long time. And one of the issues for sure is people not being sufficiently educated for the jobs that are coming up now. Increasingly, manufacturing jobs require that people have good reading skills, good writing skills, good math skills. And if they don't have that, they can't get the jobs that are available. So one of the ways you have to work on that is with better education, more perhaps vocational education. That's why Vermont Tech. That's why Stafford School in Rutland. But we need a lot more of that. And I think we're copping to that now and understanding that. But it's spotty. Some places are better than others. And yet, once you provide those opportunities, you also have to let people know that they exist and help them get access to them, because they don't always. Okay. Now, I started already to talk about how unemployment is now. The unemployment rate started falling back around 2010, when we were just beginning to come out of the recession. But the unemployment rate stayed high long after the official definition of the recession had ended. But the unemployment lingered on a long time. But we began very slowly and very gradually to recover from that recession, and it started falling. And it continued gradually, year by year, to fall all during the Obama administration. And that same trajectory is continuing now, and now we're at the historically low level of 3.7%. And I'm posting an article on Moodle to help explain that. It was basically something that was on the radio that I got the transcript for. And it turns out that part of the reason is because of that low labor force participation rate. So if there's a lot of people who, when they didn't have a job, simply dropped out, then they were not counted as unemployed. Okay, they were simply not in the labor force. And because the labor force participation rate has gone down, that means that the people who are left, who are actually seeking a job, is a relatively smaller percent. That's part of it. Another part of it is the economy really is booming right now. It's doing great. Okay, but anyway, there's more to that, and be sure you read the article. Okay, so that's it for now. This is the end of Part A of Chapter 8. Coming up, some conflicting theories about the labor market and unemployment. And as I said earlier, you need to be sure and watch this part, because there's parts of it that are